Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story, everyone. New York City. The Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom had hosted presidents, royalty, and countless society weddings, but nothing had prepared the gilded walls for what Amelia Wentworth was about to unleash on Manhattan's elite. Standing at the back of the ornate room, surrounded by 400 of New York's most powerful families, Amelia adjusted her pearl-encrusted veil while her stomach performed Olympic-level gymnastics. The hand-beaded Monique Loulier gown felt like armor, beautiful, expensive armor that was slowly suffocating her. "Breathe, sweetie," whispered her maid of honor, Sophia Bennett, while discreetly smoothing the cathedral train. "It's just a wedding to someone you barely know. Piece of cake, right?" Amelia gave her best friend a look that could freeze champagne. "Your encouragement skills are truly inspiring, Soph." Across the marble floor, Preston Langley IV adjusted his platinum cufflinks, looking every inch the perfect society groom in his custom Savile Row tuxedo. Tall, sandy-haired, undeniably handsome, and possessing all the personality of expensive wallpaper. During their 5 supervised dinner dates, he discussed nothing but stock portfolios and his collection of vintage watches. "Sweetheart, you look pale," murmured her father, Edward Wentworth, straightening his silk tie with military precision. "Amelia, darling, you're 28. It's time to secure the family legacy. The Langleys have built half of Manhattan. Preston represents stability, influence, and excellent connections. He thinks Van Gogh is a type of cheese. Character builds over time." The chamber orchestra struck the opening notes of the wedding march. Amelia closed her eyes, took the deepest breath her corseted bodice would allow, and began what felt like a walk toward her own beautiful prison. Then she spotted him. 5th row, center aisle. A man about 30 was observing the ceremony with an expression of barely contained amusement, dark brown hair that looked finger-combed, striking blue eyes, and a smile that suggested he saw something others missed. His charcoal suit was well-tailored, but clearly department store, not custom. Everything about him screamed authentic in a room full of carefully constructed facades. Their gazes locked for a moment that seemed to suspend time itself. Without warning, without thought, without any regard for consequences, Amelia dropped her $2,000 bouquet of white orchids, stepped out of the processional line, and kissed him. Not a gentle, wedding-appropriate kiss. This was a passionate, desperate, life-altering kiss that made the photographer's flashbulbs pop like fireworks and caused several elderly matrons to reach for their smelling salts. The ballroom exploded into chaos. Edward Wentworth produced a strangled noise, somewhere between shock and apoplexy. Preston's champagne glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the floor in a cascade of crystal. When they finally separated, the stranger's eyes sparkled with delighted surprise. "Well, now," he drawled with just a hint of a Texas accent. "That wasn't anywhere in today's program." Amelia stared at him, the magnitude of her actions crashing over her like a tidal wave. What have I done?" "Looks like you just kissed a complete stranger at your own wedding," he replied, clearly fighting back laughter. That's when Amelia noticed the digital camera in his left hand and the press badge clipped to his lapel. "You're a journalist, Nathan Harper, Manhattan Herald, Society Beat." His grin widened impossibly. "And you just handed me the headline of the century." Amelia felt all the color drain from her face as the reality hit her. "Oh no. Oh no. No. No." "Yep," Nathan said, still smiling, that infuriating, charming smile. "This should be interesting." The headlines were worse than Amelia had imagined in her most catastrophic nightmares. "Heiress ditches groom for mystery man," screamed the New York Post. "Wentworth scandal rocks society wedding," declared the Times. But the absolute worst was Nathan's own paper. The kiss heard round Manhattan, an exclusive inside look at high society's biggest meltdown. Amelia sat in her childhood bedroom at the family's Upper East Side townhouse, surrounded by crumpled newspapers and empty coffee cups, wearing the same silk pajamas she'd thrown on 18 hours ago. Her phone had finally died from the relentless buzzing of calls, texts, and social media notifications. Sophia burst through the door without knocking, carrying fresh coffee and wearing the expression of someone who just witnessed a natural disaster. "Okay, good news first," Sophia announced, settling cross-legged on the antique 4-poster bed. "Your dad hasn't actually committed any felonies yet." "Bad news? Preston's family is threatening to sue for breach of contract and public humiliation." Perfect. What's the catastrophic news? The catastrophic news is that Nathan Harper has requested an interview through your father, who's currently pacing his study like a caged tiger. Amelia groaned and buried her face in a Hermes throw pillow. I cannot believe I kissed a reporter. Of all the people in that ballroom, I had to pick the one whose job is literally telling everyone else's business. To be fair, you didn't know he was a reporter when you kissed him. That doesn't make it better, Sophia. Actually, it kind of does. It means you kissed him because of pure instinct, chemistry, cosmic attraction, divine intervention. Before Amelia could respond, someone knocked sharply on the mahogany door. Without waiting for permission, Edward Wentworth entered, his usually impeccable appearance slightly disheveled, a sight rarer than a unicorn in Central Park. Amelia, we need to discuss this situation. Sophia quickly excused herself, but not before giving Amelia a look that clearly said, "May the odds be ever in your favor." Edward sat heavily in the velvet armchair by the window, suddenly looking every one of his 60 years. "The Langley contract is terminated," he said quietly. "Preston's family considers the engagement dissolved due to irreconcilable differences and public embarrassment." Amelia felt a wave of relief, immediately followed by crushing guilt. "Dad, but that's not our biggest problem." He pulled out his iPad and showed her a video. "This has 5 million views." The video showed the kiss from multiple angles. Apparently, every guest had been recording with their phones. Someone had even added a romantic soundtrack. A romantic soundtrack. 5 million. Edward repeated. The comments range from "most romantic thing ever" to "spoiled rich girl thinks rules don't apply to her." The business implications are staggering. What do you want me to do? I can't unkiss him. No, but we can manage this crisis. We're meeting with this Nathan Harper character, find out his intentions, his angle. Maybe we can control the narrative before it completely destroys us. 2 hours later, Amelia found herself in the back of her father's Mercedes, heading toward a coffee shop in Greenwich Village that Nathan had suggested. She'd chosen a simple cream sweater and dark jeans, aiming for approachable but not trying too hard. The cafe was exactly what she'd expected from a journalist. Exposed brick walls, mismatched vintage furniture, and the rich aroma of freshly roasted beans. She spotted Nathan immediately at a corner table, typing on a laptop that looked like it had survived several apocalypses. He looked up as she approached, and that same devastating smile that had caused all this chaos spread across his face. "Amelia Wentworth," he said, standing and extending his hand. Officially this time, she shook his hand, trying to ignore the electric jolt that shot up her arm. "Mr. Harper, I believe we have some things to discuss. Please, call me Nathan. After yesterday, I think we're past formalities." He gestured to the chair across from him. "I ordered you a vanilla latte. Figured you might need the caffeine." "Thank you." She sat down, acutely aware of other patrons stealing glances in their direction. "So, what happens now? Are you planning to write some exposé about the crazy rich girl who lost her mind at her own wedding?" Nathan leaned back, studying her with those impossible blue eyes. "Is that what you think I am? Some gossip columnist looking to destroy people for clicks?" "I honestly have no idea what to think. I don't know anything about you except that you're a journalist and you somehow ended up at my wedding. I was covering the social event for our lifestyle section. Your family's recent business expansions have been newsworthy. The tech investments, the Langley partnership, it was supposed to be a standard society piece, and instead, you got front row seats to my complete emotional breakdown." Nathan laughed, a warm, genuine sound that made something flutter dangerously in her chest. "Emotional breakdown? Is that what you're calling it? What would you call it?" He was quiet for a moment, his expression turning serious. "Brave. Spontaneous. Maybe the first authentic moment at a society wedding in decades." Amelia felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Do you think kissing a stranger at my own wedding was authentic?" "I think," Nathan said, leaning forward slightly, "that in that moment you followed your heart instead of your obligations, and I think that terrifies you more than any newspaper headline ever could." The truth in his words hit her like a physical blow. She stared down at her coffee, watching the foam art slowly dissolve. "So what happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now?" Nathan said. "We figure out how to deal with the fact that we're both apparently viral internet sensations together." Amelia looked up sharply. "Together, Amelia," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Like it or not, we're in this mess together. We can either let the media circus destroy us both, or we can take control of our own story. What exactly are you proposing?" Nathan's smile returned, but softer this time, How about we start with the truth? No cameras, no quotes, no agenda. Just two people trying to figure out what the heck just happened. Despite everything, the scandal, the chaos, the complete upheaval of her perfectly planned life, Amelia found herself smiling back. Okay, she said, let's try the truth. This is a public relations nightmare of epic proportions, declared Margaret Baxter, the Wentworth family's crisis management specialist, as she paced around the mahogany conference table like a predator stalking prey. We're trending on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and somehow even LinkedIn. The financial implications alone. Amelia slumped in her leather chair, watching Margaret gesture dramatically while her father sat stone-faced at the head of the polished table. Nathan sat across from her, looking remarkably composed for someone who'd accidentally become the center of New York's biggest society scandal in years. However, Margaret continued, stopping mid-stride and pointing at Nathan with manicured precision. Mr. Harper here might actually be our salvation. Excuse me? Edward's voice could have frozen the Hudson River. Think strategically. The public loves an authentic love story. Right now, the narrative is entitled Heiress Ruins Wedding. But what if we reshape it into soulmates find each other against impossible odds? Amelia nearly choked on her sparkling water. Soulmates. We've had exactly one real conversation. The public doesn't know that, Margaret said, with the enthusiasm of someone who just discovered fire. What they know is that you saw him across a crowded room and couldn't resist. It's Romeo and Juliet, with better fashion and a happier ending. Nathan finally spoke up. Are you seriously suggesting we fake a relationship for publicity purposes? Not fake, Margaret said quickly. More like accelerated courtship. You two clearly have undeniable chemistry. We kissed once, Amelia protested, and the public is already emotionally invested in your story. We give them what they want. A genuine romance, a modern fairy tale. Think exclusive interviews, magazine covers, maybe even a documentary deal. Edward drummed his fingers on the table. The business ramifications of this scandal have been significant. 3 major investors have expressed concerns about the family's stability. If we could reframe this as a positive narrative. Absolutely not, Amelia said firmly. I'm not going to parade around pretending to be in love with someone I barely know just to save face. Nathan looked amused. I have to agree with her. My journalistic credibility isn't for sale. Your journalistic credibility is what created this mess, Edward pointed out. Actually, Nathan replied smoothly, I believe it was your daughter's lips that created this mess. Amelia glared at him. Are you enjoying this? A little, he admitted with that infuriating grin. It's not every day I become a trending topic. Sophia, who had been suspiciously quiet in the corner, suddenly sat forward. What if we approach this completely differently? All eyes turned to her. What if, instead of a fake relationship, you two actually spent time getting to know each other? Real dates, genuine conversations. If there's nothing there, fine. You can break up publicly and blame the pressure. But if there is something, she shrugged elegantly. At least you'll know. Amelia stared at her best friend in betrayal. Et Sophia? I'm just saying you've never kissed anyone the way you kissed him. And I've known you since we were in boarding school together. That was a moment of temporary insanity. Was it? Nathan asked quietly. Because I've been thinking about it for 2 days straight, and it felt pretty sane to me. The room fell silent. Amelia could feel everyone's attention focused on her, but she couldn't look away from Nathan's steady gaze. What exactly are you suggesting? She asked. 3 weeks, Nathan said, as if he'd been planning this response. 3 weeks of actual dating, real conversations, genuine moments. No staged photos unless we both agree. No scripted interviews, just getting to know each other like normal people do. We are hardly normal people, Amelia pointed out. No, but we could try. He leaned forward. Look, I'm not thrilled about being in the spotlight either. I'm a journalist, not a celebrity. But maybe Margaret is right. Maybe the only way through this is together. Edward cleared his throat. And at the end of 3 weeks? At the end of 3 weeks, Nathan said, still looking at Amelia, we'll know if this was just a crazy moment, or if there's actually something worth exploring. Either way, we'll have given the public their story, and hopefully they'll move on to the next scandal. Amelia felt trapped between impossible choices. 3 weeks of dating a man she'd kissed on pure impulse, or months of continued media scrutiny and family disappointment. Fine, she said finally. 3 weeks. But I have conditions. Nathan nodded. I'm listening. No interviews about our relationship until the 3 weeks are over. No staged photographs. And if at any point this becomes unbearable, we call it off immediately." "Agreed," she added, pointing a finger at him. "And if you write some tell-all article about this experience, I will personally ensure that you never work in journalism again." Nathan's smile widened. "Understood. But I have one condition of my own, which is when this is over, whether we end up together or apart, you owe me one completely honest answer to any question I choose to ask." Amelia felt a chill of apprehension. "What kind of question?" "I'll decide when the time comes." She studied his face, searching for some hint of his intentions, but found only patient curiosity and something that might have been genuine interest. "Deal," she said, extending her hand across the polished table as their hands met for the second time. Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that she was making either the best or worst decision of her entire life. Quite possibly both. "This is absolutely not what I expected a journalist's apartment to look like," Amelia said, standing in the doorway of Nathan's Brooklyn Heights loft and trying not to let her jaw drop completely. The converted warehouse space was a study in organized chaos. Exposed brick walls, industrial ceiling beams, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of the Manhattan skyline, but what caught her attention were the photographs covering every available wall surface, not Instagram-worthy selfies or vacation snapshots, but real photography. Street scenes that captured life in motion, portraits that seemed to reveal souls, moments frozen in time with an artist's eye. "What were you expecting?" Nathan asked, hanging up her cashmere coat on a vintage coat rack. "A studio apartment with stacks of newspapers and a wall covered in conspiracy theories connected by red string? Something exactly like that." "Yes." She wandered toward the photo wall, studying the images more closely. Each one told a story: an elderly man feeding pigeons in Washington Square Park, his weathered hands gentle as he scattered breadcrumbs. A young girl dancing in a fountain during a summer thunderstorm, pure joy radiating from her face. A couple holding hands on a subway platform, lost in their own world despite the chaos around them. "Did you take all of these?" "Photography was my first love before journalism took over my life. I still do freelance work whenever I can find the time." He joined her in front of a particularly striking black and white image of a street musician playing violin in the subway, his case open at his feet, morning commuters rushing past like ghosts. "That's Elias. He plays in the Union Square station every morning from 7 to 9. He's been doing it for 12 years, saving money to bring his family over from Ireland. It's beautiful. He looks so..." She searched for the right word. "Hopeful. Yes. Like he's exactly where he needs to be. Doing exactly what he's meant to do." She moved to another photograph, a mother teaching her toddler to walk in Central Park, both of them laughing as the child wobbled unsteadily. "These aren't just pictures. They're stories about real life." Nathan watched her examine his work, with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "That's the whole point. Everyone has a story worth telling, worth preserving. Even spoiled heiresses who kiss strangers at their own weddings. Especially them," he said with that devastating smile. "Though I have a feeling there's a lot more to your story than the society pages suggest." Their first official date had been Nathan's suggestion, dinner at his place instead of some trendy Manhattan restaurant where they'd be photographed and dissected by gossip bloggers. Amelia had been skeptical at first, but standing in his apartment, surrounded by evidence of his talent and passion, she felt something she hadn't expected: genuine curiosity about who Nathan Harper really was beneath the charming smile and quick wit. "So," she said, settling onto his worn leather couch while he opened a bottle of wine that probably cost less than her morning coffee, but somehow tasted better than anything in her father's temperature-controlled wine cellar. "Tell me about this journalistic integrity you mentioned. How exactly does that work in the real world?" Nathan poured 2 glasses of a surprisingly excellent Pinot Noir. "It means I don't fabricate quotes. I don't pay sources for information, and I don't compromise my objectivity by getting personally involved with the people I write about." "Am I someone you're writing about now? Are you trying to be?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with possibilities and unspoken implications. Amelia took a sip of wine to buy herself time to think. "I honestly don't know what I'm trying to be," she admitted, surprising herself with her honesty. "A week ago, I knew exactly what my life was going to look like for the next 50 years. Marry Preston, have 5 children, spend my days managing charity events, and my evenings making polite conversation at business dinners. It wasn't particularly exciting, but it was predictable, safe, and now, Now I'm having dinner with a man I kissed in front of 400 people, pretending to date him to save my family's reputation, and I have absolutely no idea what tomorrow is going to bring." Nathan sat beside her on the couch, careful to maintain a respectful distance that somehow felt both considerate and slightly disappointing. "How does that uncertainty feel?" "Terrifying, exhilarating, like I'm standing on the edge of a very tall building, and I can't decide whether to jump or step back to safety." "For what it's worth," Nathan said, his voice unexpectedly gentle, "I think you're braver than you give yourself credit for." "Brave? I ran away from my own wedding by kissing a complete stranger. That's not brave. That's self-destructive behavior that would make my therapist rich if I actually went to therapy." "No," Nathan said firmly, setting down his wine glass and turning to face her fully. "Self-destructive would have been going through with a marriage you clearly didn't want. Spending the rest of your life pretending to be happy with someone who bores you to tears. What you did was honest, impulsive, yes, but completely honest." Amelia studied his face in the soft lamplight, noting the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he was being serious. The small scar above his left eyebrow that suggested an interesting story, the way he seemed to really listen when she talked instead of just waiting for his turn to speak. "Why are you being so understanding about all this? For all you know, I really am just a spoiled rich girl who thinks the world revolves around her and her problems." "Are you?" "Sometimes," she admitted with brutal honesty. "I've never had to worry about money or jobs or health insurance or any of the things normal people stress about. I speak 5 languages because I had private tutors. I have degrees from Yale and Oxford that I've never actually used because I've never needed to work. I probably spend more on shoes in a month than most people spend on groceries. But I also volunteer at a literacy center in the Bronx every Saturday morning. I've been doing it for 4 years, and I've never told anyone because my parents think it's beneath our social station. I speak 5 languages because I genuinely love learning about different cultures, not because I had to. And I have those degrees because I actually wanted to study international relations and art history, even though I knew I'd probably never use them in any meaningful way." Nathan nodded slowly, as if he was filing away every word. "So, you're not just a spoiled rich girl. You're a complex person who happens to have been born into wealth and privilege. Is there a difference?" "All the difference in the world." They talked through dinner, homemade pasta with a sauce that Nathan had clearly spent hours perfecting, which impressed Amelia more than she cared to admit. He told her about growing up in a middle-class family in Austin, Texas, working his way through journalism school at UT, his first job at a small local paper where he had to cover everything from high school football games to city council meetings. "It doesn't sound particularly glamorous," Amelia said, twirling linguine around her fork with more enthusiasm than she'd shown for food in months. It wasn't glamorous at all, but every story mattered to someone. The football game was the highlight of some kid's senior year. The city council meeting determined whether a neighborhood got new streetlights or improved public transportation. Journalism isn't about glamour. It's about connection, about helping people understand their world and their place in it. Is that why you wanted to become a journalist? To help people? Nathan considered this while refilling their wine glasses. "Initially, I think I wanted to be important, to have my byline in major publications, to break big investigative stories, to be invited to press conferences with senators and CEOs, but somewhere along the way, I realized that the small stories were just as important as the big ones, maybe more important, like Elias and his violin. Exactly like Elias and his violin." After dinner, they moved to his small balcony overlooking the East River, the conversation flowing as easily as the wine. Amelia found herself laughing more than she had in years, sharing stories she'd never told anyone except Sophia. "Okay," Nathan said as they finished the bottle, the city lights twinkling below them like fallen stars. "Truth time. What's the most rebellious thing you've ever done? And kissing me doesn't count. That's too recent." Amelia grinned, feeling more relaxed than she had since before the engagement announcement. "When I was 17, I snuck out of our house in the Hamptons to go to a beach party with the local kids. Not the other summer residents, but the year-round locals who worked at the marina and the restaurants." Nathan nearly choked on his wine. "You did not." "I absolutely did. Sophia dared me to do it. We climbed out my bedroom window and rode bicycles 3 miles to this bonfire on the beach. It was incredible. All this music and laughter and people just being genuine and real. I felt more alive that night than I had in my entire carefully curated life up to that point." "How did your parents react when they found out?" "They didn't find out." "Well, not exactly. They knew I'd snuck out, but they assumed I'd gone to some other rich kid's house party. I let them believe their assumption." She paused, lost in the memory. "That was the night I realized how different my life could be if I had the courage to make different choices." "But you didn't make different choices." "No," she said quietly, staring out at the water. "I got scared. It's easier to live in a beautiful cage than to fly away and risk falling." Nathan reached over and gently covered her hand with his. Maybe that kiss was about finally getting tired of the cage. Amelia looked down at their joined hands, feeling that same electric jolt she'd experienced when they'd shaken hands in the conference room. Maybe. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching boats move slowly along the river, the city breathing and pulsing around them. Amelia realized she felt more at peace than she had in years. There was no pressure to be perfect, no need to perform or impress. Nathan seemed to see her, really see her, in a way that felt both terrifying and wonderful. "Nathan," she said softly. "Yeah? This doesn't feel like pretending." He squeezed her hand gently, his thumb tracing small circles on her knuckles. "No," he agreed, his voice barely above a whisper. "It doesn't." As he walked her to the car service that would take her back to Manhattan, Amelia found herself hoping that the next 2.5 weeks would pass very, very slowly. But as she settled into the back seat and watched Nathan's building disappear into the Brooklyn night, she couldn't shake the feeling that 3 weeks might not be nearly enough time to figure out what was happening between them. And for the first time in her perfectly planned life, Amelia Wentworth was okay with not knowing what came next. The second week of their arrangement began with a photographer hiding behind a hot dog cart outside Amelia's favorite coffee shop on the Upper East Side, and somehow ended with her questioning everything she thought she knew about love, life, and the difference between what you want and what you think you're supposed to want. "This is absolutely insane," Amelia muttered, sliding into the passenger seat of Nathan's thoroughly unremarkable Honda Civic, while camera flashes exploded around them like paparazzi fireworks. "How did they even know we'd be here? I didn't tell anyone except Sophia, and she would never. Someone probably spotted us holding hands yesterday at the Met and tipped off the gossip blogs," Nathan said with the kind of calm that suggested he was either very zen or completely losing his mind. "Or maybe they're just following us everywhere now. Welcome to life as a public curiosity." "Is this what celebrities deal with every single day?" Amelia asked, watching in fascination and horror as a motorcycle, with a photographer balanced on the back, tried to keep pace with their car. "This is our life now," Nathan corrected, skillfully navigating through Manhattan traffic while their motorcycle tail weaved dangerously between taxis. "And honestly, I have no idea how actual famous people maintain any semblance of sanity. I've gained a whole new respect for anyone who's ever been on a reality show." They'd planned to spend the morning at the Museum of Natural History, Amelia's suggestion, since Nathan had confessed over dinner the night before that, despite living in New York for 6 years, he'd never seen the famous planetarium show that every tourist guidebook insisted was unmissable. But with photographers now documenting their every move like they were exotic animals in a zoo, even simple outings had become elaborate productions requiring strategy meetings and escape routes. "We could go back to my place," Amelia suggested, then immediately felt her cheeks burn as she realized how that sounded. "I mean to hang out, talk. The security there actually works, and my father's in Chicago until Friday, so we wouldn't have to deal with awkward family interrogations." Nathan glanced at her with a raised eyebrow, and that smile that seemed to suggest he found her embarrassment endearing rather than ridiculous. "Your place it is. But fair warning, I'm probably going to spend the entire time trying not to break anything that costs more than my annual salary. Most of the really expensive stuff is nailed down," Amelia assured him. "Probably." 30 minutes later, Nathan was following Amelia through the imposing wrought iron gates of the Wentworth family compound on the Upper East Side, trying not to stare too obviously at the perfectly manicured gardens, the fountain that belonged in a European palace, and the limestone mansion that looked like it had been transplanted directly from a Jane Austen novel. "Sweet mother of pearl," he said under his breath as they walked up the marble steps to the front door. "You actually live here? This isn't just where you keep your summer clothes." "I have my own apartment in the converted carriage house," Amelia said, as if having your own apartment in a carriage house was the most normal thing in the world. "I moved out of the main house when I turned 25 because I wanted more independence." The converted carriage house turned out to be a 3-bedroom, 2-bath apartment with original crown molding, a working fireplace, a chef's kitchen that looked like it belonged in a magazine, and windows that overlooked what appeared to be a private park, complete with walking paths and a gazebo that probably cost more than most people's houses. "This is your idea of independence?" Nathan asked, walking to the bay window and staring out at the manicured perfection of the gardens. "Relative independence," Amelia corrected, hanging her purse on a hook by the door with practiced ease. "Coffee? I have a machine that probably cost more than your car. But I promise it makes excellent espresso." Nathan turned away from the window to find her already moving around the kitchen with comfortable familiarity, pulling delicate porcelain cups from cabinets and checking the settings on what looked like a chrome spaceship disguised as a coffee maker. "Amelia," he said slowly, leaning against the marble counter, "can I ask you something that might be completely inappropriate?" "Shoot." She didn't look up from the coffee preparation, but he could see the slight tension in her shoulders. "Do you actually want this life? The mansion, the expectations, the arranged marriages, the world where your biggest rebellion is volunteering at a literacy center?" Her hands stilled on the espresso machine control. For a long moment, the only sound in the kitchen was the soft hum of expensive appliances and the distant noise of city traffic beyond the gates. "That's a loaded question," she said finally. "Is it?" She turned to face him, leaning back against the counter with her arms crossed defensively. "I love my family. I'm grateful for the opportunities I've had. The education, the travel, the ability to help causes I care about without worrying about money. But sometimes I feel like I'm living someone else's dream instead of my own." She pushed a button, and the machine began its elaborate coffee-making ritual. "Do you know what I wanted to be when I was a kid? Art history professor?" Nathan guessed. "Close, but not kite. I wanted to be a museum curator. Specifically, I wanted to work for the Smithsonian, traveling the world to authenticate artifacts and put together exhibitions that would help people understand history through art and culture." She pulled 2 perfect shots of espresso and handed him one in a cup that probably cost more than his monthly Metro card. "I wrote my senior thesis at Yale on the impact of cultural preservation in post-conflict societies. My advisor said it was graduate-level work and suggested I apply for a Fulbright scholarship to continue the research." "What happened?" Amelia sat down at the small breakfast table, cradling her cup like it might provide answers to questions she'd been avoiding for years. "My father happened. He said it was a lovely hobby, but that my real responsibility was to the family business, to building relationships that would benefit our investments, to eventually marrying someone who could expand our influence and secure our legacy. So, you gave up on the Smithsonian." I told myself it was temporary, that I could pursue museum work later after I'd fulfilled my obligations to the family. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That was 6 years ago. 6 years of charity events and business dinners and blind dates with men who think culture is something that happens to other people." Nathan set down his cup and studied her face carefully. "It's not too late, you know, isn't it? I'm 28 years old, Nathan. I have no practical work experience, no professional connections in the museum world." "No, you have passion," he interrupted firmly. "You have world-class education, intelligence, curiosity, and enough financial security to take the kinds of risks that most people can't afford. That's more than 90% of people start with when they're chasing their dreams. And you think I should just what? Walk away from my family obligations and run off to become an Indiana Jones wannabe? I think," Nathan said carefully, "that you should consider the possibility that your family obligations and your personal dreams don't have to be mutually exclusive. Maybe there's a way to honor both." Before Amelia could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and immediately went pale. "What is it?" "Sophia. She says there are photographers at the front gate asking security about your car in the driveway." Amelia looked up at him with genuine worry in her dark eyes. "Nathan, if my father finds out you were here while he was out of town, he'll think we're more serious than we're pretending to be. He'll think I'm sleeping with you." Nathan felt heat rise in his neck and was grateful for his olive complexion that probably hid most of his blush. And that would be problematic because he's old-fashioned and protective, and he might actually hire someone to make you disappear. Amelia stood and began pacing around the kitchen island. "We need to get you out of here before the sound of the front door opening echoed through the apartment, followed by the unmistakable click of expensive Italian leather shoes on hardwood floors. Amelia, sweetheart, are you home? Whose car is in the driveway?" Amelia and Nathan stared at each other in mutual panic. "Your father's in Chicago until Friday," Nathan whispered. "Apparently not," she whispered back, her eyes wide with something between terror and mortification. "Amelia?" Edward Wentworth's voice was getting closer, and Nathan could hear the slight edge that suggested this was not a man accustomed to having his questions ignored. "Closet," Amelia hissed, pointing toward what appeared to be a coat closet near the entrance. "Hide in the closet." "I'm not hiding in your closet like some teenager who got caught sneaking around." "Then what do you suggest?" Before Nathan could answer, Edward Wentworth appeared in the kitchen doorway, still wearing his travel clothes and carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than Nathan's rent. His eyes went immediately to the 2 espresso cups on the table, then to Nathan, standing awkwardly by the window. "Mr. Harper," Edward said with the kind of controlled calm that was somehow more terrifying than shouting. "This is unexpected." "Mr. Wentworth," Nathan replied, straightening his shoulders and extending his hand with more confidence than he felt. "I thought you were in Chicago." "Obviously." Edward's handshake was firm and lasted exactly long enough to establish that he could probably crush Nathan's fingers if he chose to. "Flight was canceled due to weather. I decided to drive back rather than wait." His gaze moved between Nathan and Amelia, noting their proximity, the casual intimacy of the scene. The fact that they were alone in Amelia's apartment. "I trust you two are discussing business." "Actually," Amelia said, stepping closer to Nathan in a gesture that was either protective or possessive, "we were talking about my future." "Your future?" "My career goals. The things I want to accomplish beyond just being a good daughter and a suitable wife." Edward set down his briefcase with deliberate precision. "I see. And Mr. Harper is qualified to advise you on career planning because he understands what it means to pursue something you're passionate about," Amelia said, her voice gaining strength. "Because he built his own career from the ground up without family connections or inherited advantages." Nathan could feel the tension in the room ratcheting up like a pressure cooker about to explode. But he was also struck by the way Amelia was defending him, standing up to her father in a way that suggested this was not her usual dynamic. "Amelia," Edward said carefully, "perhaps we should discuss this privately." "No," Amelia said firmly. "Nathan is part of this conversation because he's part of my life now. If you have something to say about my choices, you can say it in front of him." Edward studied his daughter for a long moment, then turned his attention to Nathan. "Mr. Harper, what exactly are your intentions regarding my daughter?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Nathan could feel Amelia's eyes on him, could sense that his answer would determine not just his relationship with her father, but possibly his relationship with her as well. "Honestly, sir," Nathan said, choosing his words carefully, "I'm still figuring that out. What I can tell you is that your daughter is one of the most intelligent, compassionate, and genuinely interesting people I've ever met. She deserves to be with someone who sees all of that, who encourages her dreams instead of limiting them. And you believe you're that someone?" "I believe I'm someone who wants to find out." Edward was quiet for so long that Nathan began to wonder if he'd said something deeply offensive. Then, unexpectedly, the older man's expression softened slightly. "Amelia," Edward said, "would you mind giving Mr. Harper and me a few minutes to talk? Man to man." Amelia looked like she wanted to protest, but something in her father's tone must have convinced her. "I'll be in the garden," she said, squeezing Nathan's hand briefly before heading toward the French doors that led to the terrace. Once they were alone, Edward poured himself a glass of water from the refrigerator and sat down at the breakfast table, gesturing for Nathan to join him. "You know," Edward said conversationally, "in the past week, I've had 3 different private investigators submit reports on your background, your finances, your employment history, and your personal relationships." Nathan felt his stomach drop. "I see. Clean record. No significant debt beyond student loans, which you've been paying responsibly. Steady employment. Good reputation among your colleagues. No history of gambling, substance abuse, or involvement with unsavory characters." Edward took a sip of water. "Quite boring, actually. I'm sorry to disappoint. On the contrary, in my experience, boring is often good when it comes to the men my daughter spends time with." Edward leaned back in his chair. "What concerns me, Mr. Harper, is not your background. It's your profession. Your profession? You're a journalist. Your job is to tell stories, to reveal secrets, to turn private moments into public entertainment. My daughter's life has been private until very recently, and I intend to keep it that way." Nathan nodded slowly. "I understand your concerns, sir. But I should clarify something. I'm not using Amelia for a story. What's happening between us, whatever it is, has nothing to do with my work. Can you guarantee that?" "I can guarantee that I would never betray her trust or exploit our relationship for professional gain." My integrity as a journalist depends on maintaining clear boundaries between my personal and professional life. Edward studied Nathan's face for a long moment. You care about her? It wasn't a question, and Nathan found himself answering with complete honesty. Yes, sir. I do enough to walk away if staying would hurt her. The question caught Nathan off guard. What do you mean? I mean that my daughter's life is complicated in ways that you may not fully understand yet. The expectations, the pressures, the very real consequences of her choices on our family and our business. If continuing this relationship, real or otherwise, would ultimately cause her more pain than happiness, would you have the strength to end it? Nathan thought about Amelia's smile when she talked about her dreams, the way she lit up when she felt truly understood, the sadness in her eyes when she talked about living someone else's life. If I thought I was hurting her, Nathan said finally, yes, I would walk away. Edward nodded approvingly. Good answer. Now, one more question, and I want you to think carefully before you respond. Yes, sir. Do you love my daughter? The question hit Nathan like a physical blow. Love. They'd known each other for exactly 9 days. They'd shared a handful of conversations, one spectacular kiss, and a growing attraction that felt both thrilling and terrifying. Love was... I don't know, Nathan said. Honestly, it's too soon to know something like that, but I know that she makes me want to be a better person, that talking to her feels like coming home, and that the thought of not seeing her again makes me feel physically ill. That, Edward said with the first genuine smile Nathan had seen from him, sounds suspiciously like the beginning of love. Before Nathan could respond, Amelia appeared in the doorway, clearly having waited as long as her patience would allow. Are you two finished with your testosterone-fueled bonding session? She asked, though her tone was more amused than annoyed. For now, Edward said, standing and straightening his tie. Mr. Harper, you're welcome to stay for dinner. I'm curious to hear more about your thoughts on Amelia's career aspirations. As Edward left to change out of his travel clothes, Amelia turned to Nathan with wide eyes. What did you say to him? He looked almost pleased when he left. Nathan pulled her into his arms, amazed at how natural the gesture felt. I told him the truth, which was that you're extraordinary and that anyone who doesn't see that doesn't deserve you. Amelia's smile was radiant. And that I'm falling for you so hard it's probably going to leave permanent damage. This time when she kissed him, there were no photographers, no scandals, no expectations. Just two people discovering that sometimes the most unexpected moments can change everything. 3 weeks, 21 days, 504 hours, that's all they were supposed to have. 3 weeks to figure out whether the kiss that had scandalized Manhattan's elite was a moment of temporary insanity or the beginning of something that could last a lifetime. But as Amelia stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of her apartment, watching the sun set over Central Park, while wearing a dress that cost more than most people's annual salaries, she realized that 3 weeks hadn't been nearly enough time to understand the depth of what she was feeling for Nathan Harper. If anything, the arbitrary deadline had only made her more aware of how precious their time together had become, how every conversation felt like discovering a new country, how every touch sent electricity through her entire nervous system. Tonight was the Wentworth Foundation's annual charity gala, the social event of the season where New York's most powerful families gathered to write impressively large checks and pretend they were single-handedly solving the world's problems. It was also, according to their original agreement hammered out in that conference room that felt like a lifetime ago, supposed to be their last public appearance together before deciding whether to continue their relationship or stage a mutual, amicable breakup that would satisfy the media's hunger for resolution. The irony wasn't lost on her that their fake relationship was supposed to end at the same type of venue where her real feelings had begun. In a ballroom full of Manhattan's elite, surrounded by photographers and expectations, and the weight of family obligations, you look like you're contemplating either jumping out that window or setting something on fire, Sophia observed, appearing in the doorway with 2 glasses of champagne and wearing a midnight blue gown that made her look like she'd stepped out of a 1942nd Hollywood movie, which would be unfortunate considering we're on the 15th floor and you're wearing my favorite borrowed Valentino. I'm not contemplating property damage, Amelia said, accepting the champagne gratefully and taking a sip that did absolutely nothing to calm her nerves. I'm contemplating running away to join Doctors Without Borders. Ah, yes, Because nothing says escaping your problems like performing emergency surgery in war zones. Sophia settled onto the silk chaise lounge with the grace of someone who'd been attending these events since she was old enough to walk in high heels. Want to tell me what's really going on? Because for someone who's about to make her grand romantic debut with the man who supposedly swept her off her feet, you look remarkably like someone facing a congressional inquiry. Amelia turned away from the window and began pacing across the antique Persian rug that her great-grandmother had brought back from Iran in 1952 after what the family diplomatically referred to as her adventurous phase. The rug had always been Amelia's favorite piece in the apartment, partly because of its stunning beauty, but mostly because it represented the one family member who had followed her heart instead of her obligations. What if we're making a massive mistake? Amelia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Define we and massive mistake. What if Nathan and I are fooling ourselves? What if what we think is real love is just, I don't know, trauma bonding from being thrown together in this completely insane situation? What if we're like those people who fall in love during natural disasters and then realize they have nothing in common once the crisis is over? Sophia raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. Trauma bonding? Really? That's your theory for why you light up like a Christmas tree every time he texts you? It's scientifically possible. We're both under enormous pressure, dealing with constant media scrutiny, family expectations, business implications. Maybe we're just clinging to each other because we're the only two people who understand what this particular brand of circus feels like. Sophia took a delicate sip of champagne, her expression suggesting she was listening to someone explain why the earth was flat. And is that how you felt when he spent 4 hours helping you research graduate programs in museum studies? Even though he could have been working on that investigative piece about city council corruption, or when he drove to Brooklyn at 2:00 the morning because you were having a panic attack about the foundation audit and couldn't sleep, or when he learned to make your grandmother's apple tart recipe from scratch because you mentioned missing it during one conversation 3 weeks ago. Amelia stopped pacing. How do you know about the apple tart? Because I have eyes, Amelia, and because he asked me for the recipe, then spent 3 different attempts getting it right before he served it to you with coffee on Sunday morning. Sophia stood and walked over to her best friend, placing gentle but firm hands on Amelia's shoulders. Sweetie, I've watched you date a parade of theoretically appropriate men for the past 10 years. Investment bankers, lawyers, politicians, trust fund babies, all perfectly suitable on paper. I've never seen you look at any of them the way you look at Nathan. Not even close. But what if? What if you're actually happy for once in your adult life? What if you finally found someone who sees you for who you really are instead of who your last name says you should be? What if you finally have a chance at the kind of love that makes people write terrible poetry and move mountains and believe in ridiculous things like soulmates? Before Amelia could formulate a response that didn't involve admitting how terrified she was of wanting something this much, her phone buzzed with a text from Nathan, standing outside your building, trying not to hyperventilate and wondering if it's too late to fake food poisoning. Ready to face the lion's den together? Despite her anxiety, or maybe because of it, Amelia found herself smiling for the first time all day. Even his text messages managed to be both self-deprecating and reassuring, acknowledging the absurdity of their situation while making it clear that they were a team. He's here, she said, typing back quickly. Food poisoning would be the coward's way out. Let's go be brave instead. Then stop overthinking every possible worst-case scenario and go be happy, Sophia said firmly, adjusting Amelia's necklace with the efficiency of someone who'd been playing stylist to neurotic friends for years. You deserve this, Amelia. You deserve someone who thinks you hung the moon and wants to help you reach for the stars. Even if those stars happen to be in dusty museums on the other side of the world. 25 minutes later, Amelia was walking through the marble lobby of the Waldorf Astoria on Nathan's arm, feeling like she was floating in a dream that could turn into either a fairy tale or a nightmare depending on how the next few hours unfolded. The hotel's legendary elegance provided the perfect backdrop for the Wentworth Foundation's most important fundraising event of the year, an evening that would raise millions for literacy programs, arts education, and cultural preservation projects in more than 30 countries. Nathan looked devastating in his perfectly tailored black tuxedo, the kind of formal wear that transformed good-looking men into leading men and made even the most sophisticated women forget their own names. But it was the way he kept glancing at her with barely concealed wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe his luck, that made Amelia's heart do things that probably violated several laws of physics, Remind me again why we thought attending a party with 400 people who've been gossiping about us for 3 weeks was a brilliant idea, Nathan murmured as they approached the ballroom entrance, where photographers were already positioning themselves like sharks, sensing blood in the water. Because hiding would have been admitting defeat, Amelia replied, though her voice was steadier than her pulse, which seemed determined to set some kind of world record for rapid heartbeats, and because my father threatened to donate my trust fund to charity if I didn't show up to the foundation's biggest fundraiser of the year. Right. Family obligations. Nathan squeezed her hand gently, his thumb tracing small circles on her knuckles in a gesture that somehow managed to be both comforting and distracting. For what it's worth, you look absolutely stunning tonight. That dress should probably come with a warning label for causing traffic accidents. Amelia glanced down at the midnight blue silk gown that hugged her curves like liquid starlight before flowing into a train that whispered across the marble floor with every step. The dress had been a surprise gift from her mother, a peace offering after weeks of tension about Amelia's inappropriate choices and reckless disregard for family reputation. You don't look too shabby yourself, she replied, taking in the way his tuxedo emphasized his broad shoulders and the confident way he carried himself despite being completely outside his usual element, though I have to admit, I preferred you in that off-the-rack suit and the terrible vintage tie you wore to our first coffee date. Hey, that tie had character, Nathan protested with mock indignation. I'll have you know it belonged to my grandfather, and he wore it to his first job interview at the newspaper in 1953, which explains so much about your questionable fashion sense. Their playful banter was interrupted by the arrival of Margaret Baxter, looking like the editor-in-chief of a major fashion magazine in her severe black dress, and armed with a clipboard that probably contained detailed psychological profiles of everyone in attendance. There you are, Margaret said with the relief of a general who'd just located her missing troops moments before a crucial battle. The press is practically salivating for photos. The society bloggers are vibrating with anticipation, and your parents are holding court near the bar, which means we need to make our entrance before anyone has too much champagne and starts saying things they'll regret when they're sober. Good evening to you too, Margaret, Amelia said dryly. How lovely to see you again. Pleasantries are for people who aren't managing the social event of the decade, Margaret replied briskly, checking something off her list with the precision of a surgical instrument. Nathan, remember what we discussed during our prep session. Smile, like you're genuinely happy to be here. Make eye contact with the cameras, but don't stare. Keep your hand on the small of her back to suggest intimate familiarity without being inappropriate for a family event. Amelia, you're radiant and deeply in love, but not so much that you forget you're at a charity function representing your family's philanthropic legacy. Questions about wedding plans get deflected with, we're taking things one beautiful day at a time. Questions about the original wedding incident get responded to with, sometimes the heart knows what the mind hasn't figured out yet. Are you absolutely certain you weren't a CIA operative in a former life? Nathan asked, genuinely impressed by the level of strategic planning. Fashion publicist in the 92nd, Margaret replied without missing a beat. Some will say it. Higher stakes. Better shoes. The entrance went exactly as Margaret had choreographed it, like a perfectly executed dance routine they'd been rehearsing for months. Amelia and Nathan paused at the top of the grand staircase, allowing the photographers to capture what would undoubtedly become one of the most iconic society photos of the year, Manhattan's most talked-about couple making their official debut as a real relationship rather than a publicity stunt. Amelia's hand rested lightly on Nathan's arm, her smile radiant but not overwhelming, her posture suggesting both supreme confidence and romantic devotion. Nathan looked down at her with an expression that the photographers would later describe as completely besotted, his own smile genuine and slightly amazed, as if he still couldn't quite believe his extraordinary luck. The crowd below them seemed to inhale collectively, creating a moment of perfect silence before erupting into the kind of excited buzz that only came from witnessing a real-life fairy tale unfolding in front of their eyes. Here we go, Nathan whispered, beginning their descent into what felt like a beautiful, glittering shark tank filled with people who had too much money and too much time to spend analyzing other people's romantic choices. The next 3 hours passed in a whirlwind of introductions, photographs, and carefully orchestrated conversations that felt like diplomatic negotiations with very high social stakes. Amelia watched in growing amazement as Nathan navigated the complex social dynamics of New York's elite with surprising grace, asking thoughtful questions about foundation projects, discussing art and culture with genuine interest rather than polite obligation, and somehow managing to charm even her mother's most snobbish friends, women who normally treated anyone without a trust fund like they were carrying infectious diseases. "He's remarkably good at this," murmured Eleanor Wentworth, appearing at Amelia's elbow during a brief lull in the social maneuvering, while Nathan was deep in conversation with the director of the Metropolitan Museum of Art about the challenges of preserving ancient textiles in modern climate conditions. "Much better than I expected for someone from—" "What did you say his background was again?" "Texas. Middle-class family. Worked 3 jobs to put himself through journalism school at UT," Amelia replied, watching Nathan gesture animatedly as he described a photography project he'd done documenting street art in Austin's rapidly gentrifying neighborhoods. Eleanor's tone suggested she was rapidly reassessing her previous judgments about appropriate social breeding. "He seems genuinely interested in our work, not just pretending to care for networking purposes. Most of the young men at these events are only here to make business connections or find wealthy wives. Nathan's not like most young men." "No," Eleanor agreed, observing the way Nathan listened intently to an elderly patron describing her late husband's collection of Depression-era photography, his questions thoughtful and his attention completely focused. "I can see that he actually cares about what people have to say, doesn't he? He's not just waiting for his turn to talk." The evening's program included the usual elements that made these events both meaningful and tedious: speeches about the Foundation's impact over the past year, recognition of major donors whose generosity would fund literacy programs in Guatemala and art restoration projects in Cambodia, and a silent auction featuring everything from European vacation packages to private museum tours that would normally require months of waiting lists. But the highlight of the evening, at least according to the society photographers who were documenting every moment with the intensity of war correspondence, was when Amelia and Nathan took the dance floor for the traditional waltz that formally opened the evening's dancing portion of the gala. "I should probably mention that I learned to waltz from YouTube videos yesterday afternoon," Nathan confessed as he led her onto the polished marble floor, which had been cleared specifically for this moment that everyone knew would be photographed from every conceivable angle. "Seriously? Seriously. Though I did have help from Mrs. Alvarez, my neighbor's 83-year-old grandmother, who apparently competed in ballroom dancing competitions throughout the 1962nd and still has all her trophies. You asked your neighbor's grandmother to teach you to waltz?" "I asked my neighbor's grandmother to teach me how not to embarrass myself while dancing with the most beautiful woman in New York," Nathan corrected, pulling her into the proper position as the orchestra began playing a Strauss waltz that seemed designed specifically for romantic movie moments. "There's a significant difference." As they moved together across the dance floor, Amelia felt the rest of the room fade away like background noise in a movie. The photographers with their intrusive flashes, the whispered conversations of people analyzing their every gesture. The weight of 400 pairs of eyes, watching their every move, none of it mattered in that moment. There was only Nathan's hand, warm and sure against her back, the gentle pressure of his fingers intertwined with hers, and the way he looked at her like she was the only person in a universe of billions who truly mattered. "Amelia," he said softly as they turned in slow, perfect circles, their movements so synchronized it felt like they'd been dancing together for years instead of minutes. "Yes? I need to tell you something, and I need to tell you before this song ends, and we go back to being a public spectacle that everyone feels entitled to have opinions about." Her heart began beating faster, though she wasn't sure if it was from anticipation or terror. "Okay. I know we agreed that tonight would be decision time, that we'd figure out whether this thing between us is real love or just a product of extraordinary circumstances and really excellent chemistry." "Nathan, let me finish, please." His green eyes were serious, vulnerable in a way that made her chest feel tight and her breathing shallow. "I've spent the last 3 weeks trying to convince myself that what I'm feeling for you is just infatuation or gratitude for not being completely destroyed by the media circus or some kind of trauma bonding from being thrown into this completely insane situation together." Amelia felt her stomach drop toward her designer shoes. And I've realized that I'm completely, hopelessly, terrifyingly in love with you." The words hit her like a physical blow, not because they were unwelcome, but because they perfectly articulated the feeling that had been growing in her chest for weeks, a feeling she'd been too scared to examine too closely. Because wanting something this much felt dangerous in a way that skydiving or shark diving never could. "You are? I'm in love with your intelligence and your compassion and your terrible taste in romantic comedies that always make you cry, even though you've seen them 17 times. I'm in love with the way you scrunch your nose when you're thinking hard about something complicated, and how you always order the same coffee but pretend you're considering other options. I'm in love with your dreams of preserving cultural heritage around the world and your secret rebellion against the life everyone expects you to live. Tears were threatening to spill over, and Amelia blinked rapidly, trying to maintain her composure in front of 400 people and countless cameras that would dissect every micro-expression for signs of authentic emotion versus performed sentiment. I'm in love with the way you make me want to be braver, better, more honest about what I want from life, instead of just accepting what seems practical or safe, Nathan continued, his voice low and intense. I'm in love with how you challenge me to think bigger, to care more, to believe that maybe I deserve extraordinary things instead of just settling for good enough. Nathan, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the music. Most of all, he said, spinning her gently before pulling her back into his arms, I'm in love with the woman who was brave enough to follow her heart across a crowded room and kiss a complete stranger, even though she knew it would change absolutely everything about her carefully planned life. The song was ending. But Amelia didn't want to let go. She wanted to stay in this moment forever with Nathan's arms around her, and his heart laid completely bare, and the certainty that what they had was real and precious and worth fighting for, no matter how complicated the logistics became. Can I tell you something? She said as the music faded and applause began around them, though she barely heard it through the rushing sound in her ears. Anything. I'm in love with you, too, so completely that it scares me more than anything I've ever felt in my entire life. So completely that I've been afraid to admit it, even to myself. Because wanting something this much feels like standing on the edge of a cliff. Nathan's smile was radiant, transforming his entire face and making him look like he just won the lottery and discovered the meaning of life simultaneously. Yeah? Yeah? I'm in love with your passion for telling stories that actually matter, instead of just entertaining people. I'm in love with your kindness to everyone, from subway musicians to society, matrons, and the way you see possibilities and potential where I only see obstacles and complications. Other couples were joining them on the dance floor now, but Amelia and Nathan remained in their own private bubble, swaying gently to music only they could hear, while the rest of the world continued its elaborate social dance around them. I'm in love with how you make me feel brave enough to want things I never thought I could have, Amelia continued, her voice gaining strength and certainty with every word. How you make me believe that maybe I don't have to choose between making my family happy and making myself happy. How you see the person I could become instead of just the person I've always been. Such as someone who has a career that uses her brain and her education instead of just her social connections. Someone who travels the world preserving cultural heritage instead of just attending charity events about it. Someone who chooses love based on connection and compatibility instead of convenience and family approval. And you want those things. I want them so much, it keeps me awake at night. But more than that, I want them with you. I want to figure out how to build a life that's ours instead of everyone else's. I want to support your dreams while you support mine. I want to wake up every morning knowing that whatever challenges we face, we're facing them together. Nathan spun her again, more confidently this time, and Amelia realized that somewhere in the past 3 weeks, they'd learned to dance together in ways that had nothing to do with ballroom technique and everything to do with trust and timing and the mysterious alchemy of two people who genuinely brought out the best in each other. So, what happens now? Nathan asked, though his smile suggested he already knew the answer. Because I have to admit, I'm completely making this up as I go along. There's no manual for how to turn a fake relationship into a real one while managing family expectations and media scrutiny. Amelia laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years, as if admitting her feelings out loud had somehow made everything else seem manageable. Now we figure it out together. The complicated family dynamics, the media attention that will probably follow us for months, the logistics of building a real relationship while living in a fishbowl, all of it, that sounds simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. It is both of those things, but you know what's more terrifying than dealing with all of that? What? The thought of going back to the life I had before I kissed you. The thought of safe choices and appropriate matches and spending the rest of my life wondering what we could have been if I'd been brave enough to find out. Nathan pulled her closer, close enough that she could feel his heartbeat against her chest, steady and strong and reassuring. In that case, Amelia Wentworth, would you like to take a leap of faith with me? What kind of leap of faith? The kind where we stop pretending this is temporary and start building something permanent The kind where you apply to those graduate programs in museum studies and I figure out how to transition from society reporting to serious arts journalism. The kind where we deal with whatever challenges come our way because we're dealing with them as a team instead of as individuals trying to protect ourselves. Amelia looked around the ballroom at her parents, watching from the sidelines with expressions of cautious approval mixed with genuine affection, at Sophia giving her an enthusiastic thumbs up while dabbing at her eyes with a cocktail napkin, at Margaret Baxter actually smiling for once, instead of looking like she was managing a minor diplomatic crisis. Then she looked back at Nathan, at the man who had changed her life with a single, perfect, impossible kiss, and who was now offering her a future she'd never dared to imagine. "Yes," she said, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him softly while camera flashes exploded around them like fireworks on New Year's Eve. "Yes, to all of it. Yes, to taking risks and building dreams and figuring it out as we go. Yes, to you. Yes, to us. Yes, to whatever comes next." As they kissed, Amelia could hear the crowd around them, erupting in applause and cheers that seemed to shake the crystal chandeliers. She could practically see the headlines forming in real time. "Manhattan's sweethearts make it official." And "From wedding crasher to happily ever after." And probably a dozen variations on the theme of fairy tale endings that would dominate social media for weeks. But for the first time since this whole adventure began 3 weeks and a lifetime ago, Amelia didn't care about the headlines or the photographers or the public opinion. All she cared about was the man in her arms and the certainty that sometimes the best things in life began with the courage to follow your heart, especially when it led you somewhere completely unexpected and potentially wonderful. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations, photographs, and conversations with people who wanted to be part of their story. Edward Wentworth pulled Nathan aside for what appeared to be a serious but friendly conversation that ended with a handshake and what looked suspiciously like paternal approval. Eleanor Wentworth actually hugged Amelia, a rare display of maternal emotion that suggested even the most traditional members of the family were beginning to understand that some things mattered more than social conventions. As the evening wound down and the last guests reluctantly made their way toward the exits, Amelia and Nathan found themselves on the hotel's rooftop terrace, looking out over the glittering landscape of Manhattan, while the October wind carried the sound of traffic and life and possibility. "So," Nathan said, wrapping his jacket around her shoulders and pulling her close against the evening chill, "what do you think happens next? I mean, beyond the obvious things like graduate school applications and career transitions and figuring out how to merge two completely different lives." Honestly, Amelia leaned into his warmth, feeling more content than she could ever remember being. "I have absolutely no idea, but for the first time in my life, not knowing what comes next feels like an adventure instead of a crisis." "I love that about you," Nathan said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Your ability to find excitement in uncertainty instead of just anxiety. I love that about us," Amelia corrected. "The way we make each other braver." 6 months later, Amelia would receive acceptance letters from 3 different graduate programs in museum studies, ultimately choosing Columbia because of their innovative program in cultural preservation and conflict resolution. Nathan would transition from society reporting to arts journalism, eventually landing a position as the cultural correspondent for a national magazine that would send him traveling the world to cover international art exhibitions, archaeological discoveries, and cultural preservation efforts in post-conflict societies. A year later, they would get engaged in the same spot in Central Park, where Nathan had first told Amelia about his dreams of using photography to document stories that mattered, with a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, and a proposal that involved no photographers, no publicity campaigns, and no one's expectations except their own. 18 months later, Amelia would complete her first semester of graduate school while working as a research assistant on a project documenting art looted during World War II, and Nathan would publish his first major investigative piece about the illegal antiquities trade, a collaboration that would become the foundation for both their professional partnership and their personal mission to use their skills and resources to protect cultural heritage around the world. 2 years later, they would marry in a small ceremony at the Wentworth family compound, with only their closest friends and family in attendance, and a strict no-media policy that Margaret Baxter would enforce with the efficiency and ruthlessness of a Navy SEAL protecting state secrets. The ceremony would be officiated by the judge who had married Amelia's great-grandparents, and the reception would feature dancing under string lights in the garden where Amelia had played as a child and dreamed of adventures, she never thought she'd be brave enough to pursue. 3 years later, they would buy a brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, close enough to Manhattan for Amelia's work at the Metropolitan Museum and Nathan's magazine office, but far enough from the Upper East Side to feel like their own space rather than an extension of the Wentworth family empire. The house would have a darkroom for Nathan's photography and a study for Amelia's research, and the kitchen would feature a wall of photographs documenting their travels together to archaeological sites and museums around the world. But all of that was still in the future, existing only as possibility and hope, and the kind of dreams that seemed achievable when you had the right person to share them with. Tonight, there was only this. Amelia and Nathan, standing on a rooftop in Manhattan, surrounded by the lights of a city that had witnessed their love story unfold from scandal to fairy tale, holding each other close and talking about the future, with the confidence of people who had learned that the best adventures began with a single moment of courage. And if anyone had asked Amelia in that moment whether she regretted the impulse that had led her to kiss a stranger at her own wedding, she would have disavowed and said that it was the smartest, bravest, most perfectly impulsive thing she'd ever done. Because sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the most unexpected kisses, and sometimes the most important decisions are the ones you make with your heart instead of your head. Sometimes following your instincts leads you exactly where you're supposed to be. The end.